I am Mauricio Vázquez, Director of Programs of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Montgomery County. Today we are with Gabe Albornoz, who is seeking a second term as council member in Montgomery County. Gabe, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mauricio. It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you. Gabe, what prompted you to enter politics?
Well, that's a good question. It's been an interesting journey, and I was thinking about this recently, and I've always been drawn to public service and wanting to help those that are less fortunate. But it was actually an internship that I did through the University of Maryland, where I went into Mexico City and worked with an NGO called Casa Alianza that worked with homeless and runaway youth. And growing up in Montgomery County, I didn't fully appreciate the bubble that I lived in. We were an upper middle class family, never concerned about where the next meal was going to come from. And it was that experience that really kind of came in, it showed me what the challenges are across the entire country and what injustice can be. Specifically, we were working with a family of a girl who was 16 years old and was dying of AIDS, and her 1.5-year-old baby girl was HIV positive, and our job then was to find her mother. And so that took us to the outskirts and some of the shanty towns of Mexico City at the time. And I'll never forget the look on the mother's face when we let her know that we had found her daughter, and the look of despair when we explained to her that she was dying and what an HIV positive meant for her granddaughter. And so it was an enlightening and powerful experience, and that's what drew me to public service. When I got back from that experience, I worked in the nonprofit sector with the Latin American Youth Center, Children's Hospital, that taught me the importance of our nonprofit organizations, and that those injustices that I saw in Mexico City are right here in the United States as well, and in our community. And from there I went to go work for Ike Leggett as the director of the Recreation Department. That taught me of the potential of government to really help provide solutions, to be a strong partner. And it was those efforts combined that gave me the confidence that I needed to seek political office, because I realized that it's in politics and in political office where you can really truly make systemic, long-lasting change. And that's what drew me to run for office.
It's a remarkable journey,
yes,
isn't it?
It was.
So this will be your second term as council member. So what are some of the programs and initiatives that you have launched throughout this first term to help small businesses grow and particularly get out of this problem that we have with the pandemic and the crisis that we're currently living?
Absolutely. So I'll do this in 3 categories. The first is COVID. It was just about survival, frankly, for many of our businesses. And so we were very intentional about ensuring that our small local businesses, medium-sized businesses, and all businesses helped make it to the other side of the pandemic. And so we provided a record number of financial assistance and grants through a variety of different programs, thanks largely to the federal programs and the federal money that we received through the county. But we were able to work with the Department of Finance and launch these programs to more seamlessly and as quickly as possible get them into the community. We were matching some of the PPP grants that organizations were getting. We were also, in my office, helping small businesses navigate the very complex waters of trying to access those federal funds to make it as easy as possible. We were partnering with LEDC, the Hispanic Chamber, and a variety of different organizations to try and get the word out and help provide support. So that was one category, is through COVID. The second is through just general policy. One of the bills that I recently introduced before the council provides a matching grant for businesses that want to be able to help subsidize childcare for their employees. We know that one of the biggest barriers that we are seeing to people both staying and coming into the workforce through the pandemic is the lack of accessibility to childcare. This is disproportionately impacting women. And so through this grant, we're hoping that businesses will be able to utilize this and either sustain and retain some of their existing workforce, but also maybe use it as a recruitment tool in order for them to be able to bring other people in. And the last category that I've been trying to do in my position as a council member is connect organizations to services and other organizations. The favorite part of my job is the networking and the ability to go out and meet people who are often overwhelmed by the system and helping them navigate that system and connect to where they need to connect to. And I said 3 things, but one more.
Of course.
While much of the emphasis, as it should be, is our small businesses, because that makes up the vast majority of businesses here in the county, we have to understand that this ecosystem includes both small, medium, and small businesses that all can feed off of each other, that all can support each other. A Marriott, who is moving to downtown Bethesda next year, is going to need some additional layers of services, support services, and you name it, whether it's technology, whether it's supporting the 1,000+ employees that will be going into that business. And so we got to make sure that we are intentional about establishing relationships among all of those businesses, regardless of their size.
Wonderful. And the PPP funds that you just mentioned, big challenge as you take over the presidency of the council, because those funds are no longer there.
That's exactly right. And so they had an expiration date. We knew that that was going to be the case.
Yes.
So what we're going to have to do is continue to work with our state partners, but also we need to make sure that we establish policies that make it easier and more streamlined for responsible development to go in across the county. We're doing well in Bethesda. Bethesda is exploding. We're doing well in other parts of the county as well, but there's tremendous room for growth in the eastern part of the county, and Germantown, as an example, has not yet met its full potential and has the infrastructure in place to help our businesses. And so from a policy standpoint, we need to continue to do a good job of setting the table, whether it's through tax incentives, whether it's through cutting through red tape, through procurement and securing permits for building infrastructure and growth. Those are things that the county has within its control, and we've got to do a better job of managing that.
Let's go back to some of the things you mentioned in your first question. Mm-hmm. We learned that you visited the border with Mexico recently. Yes. What towns did you visit?
Well, Mauricio, that was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had in my life. So this was the second time I had the opportunity to visit the border. I had gone 3 years ago during the last wave of migration for a lot of unaccompanied youth. And what I saw was heartbreaking. We visited first a respite center, which is a place where families who are crossing the border can go to receive a hot meal, to get a bus ticket, because many of the families who are seeking asylum, who do go through the court process and are given a number for a court date later and are released to somebody's custody and care within the United States legally. But they're often released after they go through that initial process across the border with nothing more than the shirt on their backs and very little bit of a plan on how to get wherever it is they want to go. So there's a woman named Sister Norma Pimentel who works in McAllen, Texas. She works for Catholic Charities there. And on her own, 5 years ago, she established this organization that provides support services, love and care and attention to families while they're on their journey. We visited the respite center, and while we were there, they were processing more than 600 families per day.
600 families per day.
Yep, at this one location where they were going to receive a backpack full of some supplies, whatever they were happen to be able to collect that day in the way of food, they would distribute to the families. They're only there for a day, but they help navigate wherever it is they're going. I met numerous families just on the one day that we were there that were on their way to the DC region, and that had a contact of a family who maybe they hadn't met with in years, who they were coming to visit. Families who were in not that much better of a position to be able to absorb these families because of their own financial struggles and challenges. But the hardest part of the visit, was we went over to the Mexican side of the border. And under the policies of the previous administration, which have been carried forward by this administration, in part because of COVID, in large part because of COVID, families are bottlenecked in these small towns, these border towns on the Mexican side. And there was this one plaza where there were about 1,100 people, mostly families. And because the U.S. policy was that children under the age of 6 would go to the front of the line, which I think is the right thing, children over the age of 6 were still stuck. And so families with, again, not much more than the shirts on their back, living in these tents, and the drug cartels purchased these porta potties that they were charging the families 16 pesos to be able to access and utilize. And these families had no idea how long it was going to take for their number to come up before the judicial system, and they were just waiting. And you could tell COVID was a huge issue. There were a couple of organizations trying to provide some level of care, but they were not able to meet the demand. And we had met with a mother who the night before, Mauricio, had let her 9-year-old boy cross by himself with a coyote. And this mother was crushed. I mean, she was just despondent. The emotion, just the level of just sheer despair was hard to take. And when you see the conditions that these families were in, you can understand why she did it. She felt like she had no choice. So that experience for me provided the inspiration for me and Nancy Navarro and others to lead the effort to ensure that there's funding for organizations that are providing services for those families when they come over to help them holistically and strategically provide those services. I think it doesn't just make moral sense for us to do that. It makes economic sense too, because if these families are in a complete crisis when they come over, then that is a real challenge to our system that's already pretty challenged to begin with. So we need to meet these families where they are. And let's hope, let's keep our fingers crossed and pray, frankly, that our federal system finally gets its act together and passes comprehensive immigration reform. These are all potential workers. These are all people that all they want to do is they want to work.
They want to work.
They want to work wherever they can. And you're not going to find harder workers. You're not going to find more dedicated, committed people. Because think about it, the resourcefulness that it took for them to be able to get here in the first place is exactly the kind of resourcefulness and leadership and dedication that we need in employees no matter where they are. So it's a supply and demand issue, and we've got to figure it out.
And it is an opportunity.
Yes.
And we need to tap into that opportunity
Yes.
rather than seeing it as a problem or the enemy.
Exactly.
We have approximately 75,000 undocumented immigrants in Montgomery County.
Yes.
So tell us more about those programs and initiatives based on your experience on the board that can help these immigrants get a better life,
Right.
get into the system, and have a better life here in Montgomery County.
Well, the first thing that we have to do is be able to provide education. So if they have children in our school system, we have to make sure that our school system is well equipped to be able to address the social and the emotional needs as well as the academic needs of these kids. And we have to make sure that there's no wrong door. Wherever they go through, they're going to receive the same level of care, the same level of customer service, the same level of cultural competency, whatever government service that they are trying to receive. So that's number one, is we have to make sure that while they're here, they have access to a quality education. The second thing is, from a public health standpoint, we have to make sure they're okay. We have to make sure that they've been vaccinated. We have to make sure that they've received their flu shot. Sure. Because it's not just, again, morally right for us to take care of them. There's a direct line between their health and the public health of our entire community. So that's the second thing that fundamentally we as a government need to be able to provide these families that are coming over. The third thing is, in my opinion, studies have shown and analysis has shown with a good lawyer, with a good immigration lawyer, there's a strong chance that these families that come over are able to stay on some type of a short-term visa, which then allows them to work. And so I think it's in the best interest of the county for us to be able to provide some level of legal service to these families so that they can not only have the peace of mind that their issues are being addressed from a legal standpoint, which puts them in a better position to receive either temporary or permanent status, but then here's another worker who can come into our system, who can come and work for the myriad of small local businesses that are desperately looking for people to help them. And that's in all sectors, both professional sectors, but also in hospitality as well, and construction, and you name it. There isn't a sector that's out there right now that doesn't
have a shortage of workers everywhere.
That's right.
At the ports.
Yes.
Logistics.
Exactly.
Everywhere.
Exactly. So those are some of the things that I think we can and should provide in the way of support for these families.
You touched on education briefly, and here in Montgomery County and Maryland in general, white students are more than twice as likely to meet or exceed expectations on the 4th grade reading and math than both black and brown children. And this gap continues to expand.
Yeah.
It's not getting better, it's actually getting worse.
Right.
What do we need to fix it?
Absolutely.
So that we can provide better education to our children and we can bridge this gap and then provide these children with opportunities that other children are having in the community and they're being marginalized, and all the consequences that this brings as they grow up and become adults.
Absolutely. So it's heartbreaking to see the statistics and the numbers which have been there for way too long. And I think we need a paradigm shift in how we educate and support our children and youth, particularly the sons and daughters of our immigrant communities. So let me tell you a little quick story. So my parents immigrated here from South America, from Chile and Ecuador. And they were very smart. I was born in 1976, so that's how old I am. But they were very smart because they exclusively, and they were militant about speaking to me in Spanish. They only spoke to me in Spanish. We live with my abuelitos. And so now they spoke Chilean Spanish, but that's okay.
That's okay. That's
so they wanted to make sure that I was going to grow up fully bilingual, fully fluent. So I actually didn't pick up English until I was in grade school, and that's when I was first exposed. And so that put me a little behind because of the curriculum that had been established at the time, which hasn't changed very much since then. And in 3rd grade, they wanted to put me in special education. And I have nothing to say negative about special education because it's so important for so many kids. But I didn't belong in that program. But because of the English proficiency issues, because it took me a little bit longer because of the way that the curriculum had been taught, I was behind. We need to change the curriculum. We need to acknowledge that this needs to be taught in dual language. And if the preference of the child is in Spanish or in French or in another language of origin, then let's maximize that. Let's take advantage of that because it's a tremendous asset to have kids who are going to grow up that speak multiple languages in a global economy. It's huge.
It makes our workforce truly international.
Yeah, so I think we need to view that as the asset that it is from the early age that it is. So that's the first thing. We need a sea change in how we think about our curriculum. The second thing is we do need to acknowledge that particularly for our newly arriving kids who've gone through the trauma of having to cross the border and leave their families and sacrifice all that they're sacrificing, we need to provide special supports for them. Now, the thought has always been, let's have them go into a school and then provide the appropriate level of support. For some of our kids, Mauricio, it needs to be more in depth than that. We need, in some cases, schools that these kids can go to that really uniquely meet their needs. And those schools need to just meet the needs of the kids, but of their parents as well. And that's the final factor. While we're educating these kids, we need to educate their parents. We need to provide support for their parents because there are some instances in which mom and dad are not in a position to be able to help with homework because of their own challenges and struggles or their own English level proficiency. So we either need to provide tutors, but we also need to be able to provide support for those families and raise all boats at the same time. There's a really great program in DC called Carlos Rosario. It's one of my favorite programs in the area. They provide a really unique adult education component that I think is tremendously beneficial. And the final thing that we haven't tapped into here, our private sector has a role to play here as well, and an opportunity for them to be able to provide meaningful internships and apprenticeships. That Europe is bringing back apprenticeships. Apprenticeships that occurred in the 50s and 60s. We need to start thinking in that way because it's all those things combined and much more. I think are going to make a difference.
So why is taking Montgomery County so long to implement some of these measures?
I think it's a combination of three factors. One, when you think about the history of Montgomery County, this has been going on for too long, but in the grand scheme of the history of the county, it's actually not that long. And so I think that I've been tremendously impressed recently with the openness of this and previous superintendents to change the paradigm, to change things up. And there's always going to be opposition to some of that change, but I think there has to be the political will to be able to try. That's sort of on a baseline level. And the second thing, I guess, is there's been disagreement within our own community about this. And we have to make sure that there is less of that disagreement so that to the degree to which there can be, we're on the same page. And the coalition needs to go beyond just our Latino community. We need to partner with our Asian community, our Black and Brown communities, and our Caucasian communities as well. And I think that's going to take some time, but I'm starting to see the political will there.
There's potential.
Yes.
So let's talk about infrastructure. So the biggest infrastructure project in Montgomery County now and across Maryland is the expansion of the I-495 and the I-270, the I-495-270 program.
Yes.
How do you see that program? Advantages, disadvantages? Is that going to help us?
Yes.
Is it going to hinder economic growth in the long term?
Absolutely. So let me take 2 steps back. And I think there is universal agreement in several areas. Number one, our traffic is getting worse. Undisputable. It is affecting quality of life. It is impacting our ability to bring in businesses, particularly up the I-270 corridor in the Germantown and Rockville North and Clarksburg areas, which have in their master plans the ability to build more businesses and have more infrastructure, but it just hasn't been able to catch. So that's one, traffic is getting worse. The second indisputable fact is it's a false dichotomy to pit cars against mass transit. We need both. It's not one or the other. The third issue that I think is indisputable is that we have a really unique opportunity right now, in part because of the pandemic, to think especially creatively in how we address the transportation challenges as a region, not just in Montgomery County, but as a region. So how do we do that? Now, I have been at first disappointed in the way that the governor's team rolled out this effort. There was a lot of miscommunication, a lot of mistrust that was built early on in the system. I remember attending one of the first sessions that the governor's team came to present to the community, and they had different diagrams of different options. One of the options, and I'm not making this up, was widen the lanes in 495 so that, but to do that, Holy Cross Hospital was going to have to be moved. That was one of the options. So immediately, people were like, are you kidding me? How is that even going to be possible? And so that began to draw the lines and the opposition because of the misinformation and the lack of clarity and the mistrust that built through this process. I happen to think that there's a tremendous opportunity for us, particularly within 270, to widen the lanes responsibly. And I think we have to look at a solution that looks at widening lanes, but also create specific lines for a mass transit option, which I think is going to be very important. 495 is more complicated because just the typography and the issues with climate impact are real and something that we're going to have to further analyze. But I think that this can be phased in a way that's responsible, that starts with 270 but goes further up 270 than the plan currently calls for, which basically almost ends at the Frederick-Montgomery County line. It doesn't address the bottleneck that occurs on that line, and that has to be addressed, or widening the lanes will make some improvement but not make the full improvement that it should. But the other, I think, potential solution here, we need to extend the red line. We need to extend the red line beyond Shady Grove, which Shady Grove is one of the top 3 most utilized metro stations in the entire system. And it's because of the demand from parts north of Shady Grove, which to me demonstrates and dictates that their ability for extension. And if you look at the Silver Line in Northern Virginia, very similar in what's possible. So I think those are all things that need to be taken into account. So that was a very long-winded way of saying, yes, it provides tremendous economic potential, and it has to be done because our infrastructure desperately needs it.
So finally, what would you say to those who are still undecided to vote for you? Why vote for Gabe Albornoz?
Well, thank you, Mauricio. Well, I just sidebar. Before I decided to run for a second term, I needed a very important endorsement, and that was my wife. So we had to talk through, because it is challenging, to say the least, with 4 kids, but I still get so much energy from public service. I still enjoy the ability to navigate some very complex waters. And I would say, I would hope that voters would consider voting for me for 3 reasons. There are many, but these are the top 3 in my opinion. Number 1 is experience. I worked in the executive branch for 12 years. I've been the director of the HHS committee through the pandemic and through COVID, and have been immersed in all things related to some of the most complex policy challenges in the history of this county and this country. We've navigated those waters, and I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish. On this next council, there will be at least 5 new council members, and we're going to need experience to help shepherd us through the next phase as we come out of the pandemic and take advantage of opportunities that are out there. So number 1 is experience. The second, I'm proud of my policy record. We've been able to accomplish a lot in our first term. In the public health space, we have created a law that would eliminate vape shops from being able to operate within a mile of schools. We know vaping is a huge public health issue. We are launching a new initiative to provide something called Universal Basic Income, which is one of the best ways to end poverty, and a program and initiative that I'm very proud of as well. In about a month, you're getting a preview. I will be announcing an initiative to end childhood hunger in Montgomery County in the next 3 years, which is imminently possible, and with the right leadership can absolutely be achieved. And the other policy areas that I'm particularly proud of is I think we have responsibly addressed the issues around social justice and equity, which are very important to our community and part of our DNA. So on policy, I'm proud of what we've done. And third, I'd like to consider myself a bridge builder. We were talking about infrastructure earlier. I want to make sure that all voices are heard, both progressive and moderate and conservative, and that we listen to each other. I learned a long time ago we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We need to listen, and I want to be able to help build those broad coalitions that help us become stronger as a community. So for all those reasons and more, I hope that people will consider voting for me in this next cycle.
Well, Gabe, thank you very much for joining us today. We wish you the best, and we hope to talk to you again as we get closer to Election Day.
Thank you. Thank you, Mauricio.